Everyone in the Meridian Premier Lounge at O'Hare assumed she had wandered in by mistake. She was wearing faded cargo pants and a fleece pullover that had been washed so many times it had gone from forest green to something closer to gray. Her shoes were trail runners with dried mud still caked in the treads, the kind that accumulates when you've been moving between places where the roads stopped being paved. She was carrying a canvas tote bag with a patch of duct tape covering the corner where the stitching had given out, and she was holding a paper cup of coffee she'd gotten from the regular terminal before she remembered the lounge pass was somewhere in her bag. She'd had to dig for it at the desk. Her name was Dessa Ruhl. She was 32 years old. She sat down near the windows overlooking the tarmac, set her coffee on the side table, and exhaled once, the way you exhale at the end of something rather than the beginning. She was 3 weeks back from a rural health clinic in eastern Montana. Before that had been 6 months in a mobile medical unit running between 4 counties in West Virginia, where the nearest hospital was 40 minutes away and the nearest specialist was 4 hours. She had been doing this work for 4 years, and the fatigue had a particular texture now. Not burnout. Something more settled than that. The kind of tiredness that comes from doing the right thing consistently enough that it stops feeling heroic and starts feeling like gravity. The lounge was the kind of space that did not acknowledge effort. Low lighting, leather seating, a buffet table with 3 kinds of cheese. There were maybe 12 other people in the room. Most of them were in suits. Most of them had the posture of people who considered this an extension of their office and were filing it accordingly. Dessa turned a challenge coin over between her fingers without looking at it. It was a habit she'd had for 5 years, ever since someone pressed it into her palm as a transport helicopter lifted her out of a valley in southern Afghanistan she was not supposed to have been in. The coin was brass, dulled with handling, about the size of a quarter but thicker. One side had a caduceus inside a 7-pointed star. The other side had a unit designation she had never been authorized to disclose and still didn't, even now. She turned it over once, twice, put it on the armrest, picked it up again. That was when the Wallers arrived. She noticed them the way she noticed most environmental changes, without turning her head, without breaking the particular neutral expression she'd learned in places where a readable face was a liability. They came through the lounge entrance with the accumulated weight of people who had never in their adult lives questioned whether they were in the right room. The man was in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing the kind of sport coat that was expensive specifically in its understatement. The woman beside him was 10 years younger, with the tight-shouldered posture of someone who had spent her entire social life understanding that the world was organized into tiers, and her job was to enforce the ones she'd earned access to. They found their seats. The man stood a moment longer, and his gaze moved around the room with the practiced efficiency of someone conducting an inventory. It stopped on Dessa. She didn't look up. She felt the stop-the-way-you-feel assessment when you've been in situations where being assessed could mean something consequential. He sat down, murmured something to his wife. His wife looked over once, and something moved across her face that didn't need a name because everyone has seen it. The particular expression of a person who has decided something about you based on the thickness of your fleece. They waited 4 minutes before the woman approached the lounge attendant. The attendant's name was Meredith. Dessa had clocked her when she came in. She had the quiet efficiency of someone who'd worked hospitality long enough to identify problems before they arrived, and she'd checked Dessa's access pass carefully but without judgment, which Dessa had appreciated. Meredith was listening to the Waller woman now with a professional expression that was doing considerable work to stay neutral. Dessa couldn't hear what was being said. She didn't have to. Meredith came to her 2 minutes later with the particular walk of someone who had been asked to do something they didn't want to do and had decided to do it anyway, because that was what the job required. "Mrs. Ruhl." Her voice was low, not unkind. "I'm sorry to bother you. I've had a concern raised about your guest access." Dessa showed her the pass again. Meredith looked at it longer than she had at the desk. "The pass is valid," she said. Then she glanced toward the Wallers and back. "A guest has raised a concern about," she paused, choosing the word The appropriateness of the lounge environment being maintained for paying members. She stopped. I'm not saying this is my position. I understand, Dessa said. There's a quieter waiting area just outside the lounge near gate H11. There's no charge. It's all right, Dessa said. She picked up her coffee and her bag. She put the challenge coin in her jacket pocket. She stood and nodded to Meredith, who looked back with an expression that was trying not to be apologetic and failing slightly at it. As she moved toward the door, she passed within 6 feet of Mrs. Waller, who had returned to her seat and was looking at her phone. Reginald Waller, she'd read his name on the luggage tag when they came in, was leaning back with the relaxed posture of a man who had initiated something and considered it settled. He didn't look at her. The waiting area outside gate H11 was fine. Plastic seats, a departures board, a vending machine 2/3 stocked. There was a family at the far end, 2 parents, a boy who looked around 7, a wheeled suitcase with a cartoon dinosaur on it. The boy was in the aisle seat, quiet in the way kids get quiet when they're bored past the point of displaying it. Dessa sat down. She pulled a worn paperback from her bag and opened it to a page she'd already read twice. She was not, she told herself, bothered. She'd done this particular recalibration many times. The mental math on situations where you could spend energy being rightfully angry or you could save that energy for something it could actually move. She was very good at this math. She'd been doing it since long before she'd ever heard of Forward Surgical Team 9 or the valley outside Kirkuk, where the math had briefly become a matter of survival. She was going to read her book. She was on the same paragraph for the 4th time when she heard a sound she recognized. Not a scream, not a cry. Something before those things, a gasp that came from a parent watching a child do something the body shouldn't do. She had heard that sound in 3 different countries, in rooms with dirt floors and rooms with marble floors, and her body responded to it before her brain completed the identification. She was moving before she finished standing. The boy had slipped sideways in his seat. His lips were wrong, not quite the right color. His mother had her hands on his shoulders and was calling his name in the voice that meant she didn't know what was happening and was terrified that she did. His father was already on his feet, looking around for someone with an answer. Dessa crouched in front of the boy. "What's his name?" she said to the mother. Cameron. Cameron. She put 2 fingers against his neck and found his pulse, too fast, thready, and she looked at his eyes and his mouth and the skin on the back of his hand, all in the time it took the mother to say her next word. "He has allergies." "Peanuts? Tree nuts? Does he have an EpiPen?" "In the bag, yes." "Get it now," she said it calm, not loud. The specific register of someone who has given instructions in environments where panic was contagious and you could not afford to catch it. The father got the bag. His hands were shaking. Dessa took the EpiPen from him without making the handoff feel like a correction, and she administered it in one smooth motion that had no wasted movement in it, the kind of economy that comes not from training alone, but from training performed under conditions where every second costs something. "He's going into anaphylaxis," she said. "Call 911 now. Tell them EpiPen administered. He'll need a second dose if he doesn't respond in 10 minutes, and tell them his weight." She looked at the mother. "How much does he weigh?" "He's 63 pounds. "Good. Tell them 63 pounds. She kept her hand on Cameron's wrist and counted without counting, the way she'd learned to run parallel processes when one part of her brain needed to stay with a patient and another part needed to stay with the room. She was aware of people gathering at the edges of her peripheral vision. She was aware of the departures board clicking to a new display above them. None of that was information she needed right now, so she filed it and kept her attention where her attention needed to be. Cameron began to respond in the 8-minute window. His color shifted. His breathing changed in the way breathing changes when it's finding its way back to a functional rhythm. His mother made a sound. "He's okay," Dessa said. "He's responding." She looked up at the father, who had not moved, who was watching her with the expression of a person seeing a skill they didn't know existed until they needed it. "Ems is coming. Don't let him stand up yet. Keep him still." She stayed with them. She did not notice, for the first few minutes, the man standing at the edge of the crowd that had gathered. He was tall, late 50s, in civilian clothes that were not quite civilian in the way that military posture is never quite civilian once it's been trained in. He was watching her specifically, not the child, in the way you watch something when you've recognized it and are running the recognition back to see if you're right. EMS arrived in 11 minutes. Dessa gave them the handoff in the clipped, specific language of a person who had handed off patients in bad conditions and knew exactly which information mattered and in what order. The lead medic looked at her once with a slight frown that meant he was recalibrating something, but he didn't ask, and she didn't explain. She stepped back when they had Cameron. His mother caught her hand for a moment, both hands, held on for a second that was not about words, and then let go and went to her son. Dessa stood at the edge of the gate area and breathed. That was a primary survey, a voice said behind her. She turned. The man was closer than she'd registered. He was looking at her with the direct attention of someone who had made a decision and was following it through. "I'm sorry," she said. "The way you assessed him, airway, breathing, circulation, in sequence." He paused. "That's not first aid training." She looked at him. She had in 5 years gotten very good at the particular neutrality required when someone was approaching the edge of something she had spent 5 years maintaining a wall around. "I took a wilderness medicine course," she said, "and some additional training." What kind of additional training? It wasn't quite a question. People who'd been in command long enough sometimes stopped making questions sound like questions. "I work in mobile medical units," she said. "Rural postings." He nodded slowly. His eyes moved just for a moment to her jacket pocket where the edge of the challenge coin was visible. Just the edge. Just a curve of brass. He went very still. "Where did you get that coin?" he said. The noise of the terminal continued around them. The departures board clicked. Somewhere down the concourse, a boarding announcement started. "It was given to me," she said. "By whom?" She looked at him. The wall she'd maintained for 5 years had a door in it, and the door had a particular combination, and she had never expected to find the combination standing in front of her in a civilian jacket at O'Hare. "A transport crew," she said, "in 2019. "February," he said, "Kirkuk. That's when Forward Surgical Team 9 ran their last rotation." The terminal was loud the way terminals were loud, the constant underlying roar that becomes background until it suddenly isn't. "My name is Dessa Ruhl," she said. "I'm a medical volunteer. I work rural clinics." "I know what the coin is," he said. His voice was precise in the way of a man who chose words the same way no others. "I ran FST-9 from 2017 to 2019. I know every piece of documentation that unit produced, every commendation, every debrief." He paused. "And I know there's one action from the February rotation that was never fully documented, because the report covering it was amended 48 hours after the initial submission." Dessa didn't move. "There was a medic at the secondary exfil point," he said, "not assigned to FST-9, not assigned to any unit in that sector. She worked on 4 casualties for 35 minutes under active contact. She stabilized 3 of them." He stopped. The 4th was already beyond stabilization when she found him. She stayed anyway. Something in Dessa's chest did what it sometimes did when the sealed part of her memory became unsealed without warning. "We got her name once," the man said. "One of the casualties told us in the hospital, and then the report was amended, and her name wasn't in it anymore." He looked at her steadily. "I've been looking for her for 3 years." He held out his hand. "General Cormac Specht, retired." She took his hand. "Dessa Ruhl." "I know," he said. The flight to Portland was delayed 40 minutes, which gave them time to find seats near a window nowhere near the Meridian Premier Lounge. Specht talked in the careful way of a man who understood he was delivering information that had been withheld for 5 years and that the sequence in which he delivered it mattered. He didn't dramatize, he just laid things down in order. In February 2019, Forward Surgical Team 9 was providing support for a classified reconnaissance operation in Kirkuk Valley. A patrol hit an IED on the secondary route and was pinned at an exfil point that wasn't on the primary plan. The response was delayed 17 minutes due to a communication breakdown at command. In those 17 minutes, a Navy medical officer separated from her own unit during a parallel support mission found them. She stabilized a femoral bleed on Staff Sergeant Ennis Farr that would have killed him in approximately 8 minutes. She managed a tension pneumothorax on Corporal Ibarra with 2 items from a field kit and improvised equipment. She kept a third casualty, PFC Alden Wolf, conscious and stable until the helicopters came. She was gone by the time they left. The initial after-action report from FST-9 identified her by description. The amended report, filed 48 hours later by Lieutenant Colonel Orrin Clast, listed the assisting medic as unidentified. The amendment coincided with an internal inquiry into whether an unauthorized personnel incursion into the operational sector constituted a security breach. Clast had flagged it as a liability. He'd moved to contain it. Dessa had been given 2 options in a debriefing room 3 days later. Formal documentation of an unauthorized sector breach with the attendant career consequences, or silence, with the understanding that the instance would be handled internally and she would face no official repercussions. She had chosen silence. She'd been 27 years old. She'd been exhausted in a way she didn't have words for yet. She'd looked at the math and chosen the number that let her leave. Clast had a board inquiry pending from a separate matter, Specht said. Documenting an unauthorized personnel action would have strengthened his case that oversight standards had failed. He needed the sector clean. He paused. He needed you not to exist. I left the service 8 months later, Dessa said. I know. His voice had an edge that wasn't directed at her. You left without distinction, no commendation, no adverse action, just gone. She looked at the departures board. A flight to Dallas was boarding. Farr is alive, Specht said. She already knew that. In the abstract way, she knew things she'd refused to let herself confirm. She'd told herself for 5 years that the not knowing was better than the alternative. She'd been mostly right about that and partly lying to herself. He got out 2 years ago, Specht said. He's in Spokane. He has a wife, a daughter. She didn't say anything for a moment. He knew your name, Specht said. He told his wife. He filed a formal statement when my inquiry started, a full account of what you did and who you were. He paused. He said you talked to him. While you were working on Ibarra, you kept talking to him. You kept him focused. She remembered this. She remembered Farr's face. She remembered telling him something about the temperature dropping after sunset at elevation, because it was a true thing and a neutral thing, and she'd needed him to stay with her, and she'd known it would take something small and real to do it. He said you told him the stars would be better from the ridge, Specht said. It was something to say, she said. It worked, he said. He kept saying that you gave him something to stay for. The terminal was the way terminals were, people moving through, the smell of the coffee place 2 gates down. An ordinary afternoon doing what ordinary afternoons did on days when nothing was ordinary at all. What happens now? Dessa said. There's a review process, Specht said. I've been working with the Military Records Correction Board for 2 years. Your formal, on-record account is the last piece they need to move forward. He looked at her. The classification covering Karkuk expired 18 months ago. Clast's amendment no longer has the standing it had when he filed it. Your record can be corrected. What does that mean, practically? It means your name goes back into the document it was removed from. It means the commendation recommendation that Sergeant Farr filed, that FST-9's commanding officer filed, before Clast amended it out, gets processed. He paused. And it means the 5 years you spent invisible because of a decision made in a debrief room gets officially acknowledged to have been wrong. She sat with that. She had spent 5 years building a life that didn't require acknowledgement. She'd made peace, or something close enough to peace that she could function inside it, with the idea that the record would say what it said and she would know what she knew, and those 2 things would coexist without ever resolving. She'd been good at it. Genuinely good at it, the way you get good at things you do out of necessity long enough that they stop feeling like coping and start feeling like character. She discovered, sitting in a plastic chair in Terminal H at O'Hare, that she hadn't been as good at it as she thought. "Okay," she said, "tell me what you need." She gave her formal statement 10 days later in a building in Washington that had no personality in the way government buildings sometimes had no personality by design. She told it once, in sequence, without embellishment and without omission, the way she'd learned to communicate information in conditions where every word was a resource. She said what she'd found when she reached the exfil point. She said what she'd done and in what order and why. She said the name of every person she'd treated and what she'd treated them for. She said the names of the 2 items she'd used for the improvised chest decompression, and she said what the valley had sounded like and what the air had smelled like, and how long she'd waited after the helicopters lifted before she moved. Because those details were the details that could only be provided by someone who had been there. The recording officer across the table looked at her once during the chest decompression description with the expression of someone who had just done a different calculation about the woman sitting across from them. Specht was in the room. He said nothing during the statement. When she finished, he said, "Thank you," and it landed the way thank yous land when the person saying them means them fully and has been saving them for a while. Clast's amendment was formally challenged 4 weeks later. It was built on testimony from Farr, Ibarra, the surviving members of FST-9, and Dessa's account. Clast retained lawyers. The lawyers argued procedural grounds. The arguments were not sufficient. The amendment was overturned in 6 weeks. She was at a rural clinic in southern Idaho when Specht called her. "It's done," he said. She was in the small back room that served as a break area, eating a sandwich she'd been meaning to eat since noon. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. "Your name is back in the record," he said. "The commendation recommendation has been processed." He paused. "Medical commendation for valor under fire." "It's not nothing, Dessa." "I know," she said. It came in the mail 2 weeks later. She opened the small velvet box at her kitchen table in the apartment she rented month to month in Boise. The medal was smaller than she'd expected. It was precise and serious and had her name on the citation. She read the citation twice, set it on the table, and looked at it while she finished her coffee. Luan Farr called on a Tuesday. She had Dessa's number from Specht's office. She'd asked for it when the news about the commendation came through. She'd wanted to call sooner, she said, but she hadn't known what to say, and she'd spent 3 weeks thinking about it, and finally decided she wasn't going to figure out what to say by thinking about it. "Ennis told me everything," Luane said, "a long time ago, before the formal stuff. He told me what happened and who you were and what you did." A pause. "He tells it differently every time, but it always ends the same way, with you telling him about the stars." Dessa was in her car in the clinic parking lot. She'd taken the call before she went inside. "He's okay," she said. "He's really okay," Luan said. "He manages logistics for a cold storage company which would bore you to tears, and he coaches his daughter's soccer team." She paused. "He's genuinely, actually okay." The relief that went through her was out of proportion to the words, which was how she knew she'd been holding that particular thing for 5 years without fully understanding she was holding it. "That's good," she said. "He wants to talk to you," Luan said. "Sometime. When it feels right, he's not going to push for it." A pause. "But I wanted to say it myself, what you did for him and for our family, before we had a family. I didn't need a record to tell me it mattered. I've known it mattered for 5 years because he's here." She stopped, "But I'm glad the record says it now, for what that's worth." "It's worth something," Dessa said. "I think so too," Luan said. "I think it matters who gets to exist in the official story." After the call, Dessa sat in the car for a while. The Idaho afternoon was going flat and orange at the edges. There was a hawk on the clinic's power line, completely still, watching the field next to the parking lot with the focused patience of something that knew how to wait. She thought about the lounge at O'Hare. She thought about Meredith's walk and the carefully neutral face doing considerable work. She thought about Reginald Waller leaning back with the posture of a man who had initiated something and considered it settled, and she felt not anger, not anymore. Something cooler than that. The recognition that the architecture of dismissal was doing what it always did, which was less about the specific person it targeted and more about the specific person it revealed. She would have been moved out of that lounge regardless of what she'd been. She'd learned a long time ago that you couldn't argue with the kind of contempt that didn't actually need a reason to function. It found a reason, but the reason was never the point. The point was she'd been there. She'd been there on the tarmac and at gate H11 and in a valley in Kirkuk with a field kit and 35 minutes and 4 people who needed her to know exactly what to do. The record said so now. Officially, completely, in language that could not be amended again by someone who needed her to not exist. She got out of the car and went back to work. Meredith called her on a weeknight, from her own number. "I've been thinking about what I did," Meredith said, "or what I didn't do, which is different from what I should have done." "You did your job," Dessa said. "I did the comfortable version of my job." A pause. "You just went. You didn't argue and you didn't make it difficult, and you just went, and I've been thinking about that ever since." "I'm okay," Dessa said. "I know," Meredith said. "I looked you up. I saw what you did. I wanted to call because I want to be someone who says something when it matters, and I missed my chance once, and I didn't want to miss it twice." Dessa thought about this. "You're saying something now," she said. "I guess I am," Meredith said. "That counts," Dessa said. In Spokane, Ennis Farr was putting his daughter to bed when his wife came to the doorway and told him Dessa Ruhl had called back and said she'd be glad to talk whenever he was ready. No rush. He sat on the edge of his daughter's bed after Luane left, and the 7-year-old asked him what was wrong. And he said nothing was wrong, actually, and she said then why did he look like that? And he said he looked like someone who'd just gotten good news. She considered this with the seriousness that 7-year-olds sometimes brought to adult expressions they didn't quite have the vocabulary for. "Good news is good," she said. "Yeah," he said, "it is." He turned her nightlight on and left the door half open, the way she liked it, and he stood in the hallway for a moment in the quiet house and thought about a valley in southern Afghanistan, and a woman who had talked to him about stars, and a cold storage job, and a daughter who existed because someone with a field kit in 35 minutes had decided that was enough time to do what needed doing. It had been enough. It had always been enough.